necessarily show the consistent aggressiveness that you want. The Raptors put him at center. I think if he did that all season, people would be pretty thrilled. Playing him center right now just plays up his strength.
He may be, and I think you talked to Coach David Thorpe about this, and I know JD Bunkus has as well, that it at least looks like there wasn't the level of work on those weaknesses that you'd maybe expect.
Jonathan, you mind if I call you back? Or I just put you on hold for a sec?
Sure.
Okay, great. How you doing, Blake?
Yo, what's going on, man?
Not too much. What's going on?
My audio okay?
Yeah, your audio is great.
Cool.
So
what's up? I figured this was easier than going back and forth on Twitter, or like me hearing whatever. Like I don't care. But if we're gonna have a basketball conversation, we may as well have a basketball conversation instead of doing it in tweets.
I appreciate you doing this, by the way. I want to be, first of all, very respectful and thankful to you for calling in. I appreciate it. So I just want to lay out what I think is happening, and I respect you. I've read your work, and I genuinely feel like you're one of the good guys. I'm not pandering to you right now. I'm telling you where I'm starting from on this.
No, I get it. I mean, I've checked out some of your stuff. I know that, like, I didn't expect to come on here and you to say anything other than what you feel and straight shooting. So you don't need to qualify it.
Thank you. Okay. So I feel that there was a certain expectation of the type of prospect that the Raptors drafted over Jalen Suggs 18 months ago. And I feel that there have been a lot of efforts to put a square peg into a round hole when it comes to Scottie. Now, I understand that development is not linear. Some players are going to go through bumps and bruises. But I take a major issue when this guy, whose work ethic should never be questioned given how far he's come in the last 24 months, is being openly dogged by Doug Smith. Now, you are not Doug Smith. I understand that. You do not speak for all of Toronto media. I get that. But when the talking points are consistently going to be, well, Scottie, there's an inside source in the Raptors locker room that's, Scottie Barnes, some eyebrows were raised. I feel like all of this language is very weird to me. Michael Grange calling him out, Doug Smith, Josh Lewenberg, Will Lou, in my opinion, has had kid gloves on when it comes to Fred VanVleet's struggles this year. And I understand that everyone's rooting for the guy and there's a lot of nostalgia attached to the championship run. But can we call an ace an ace? When Josh Lewenberg says 4 out of 5 starters are, had a good game, I think that's ridiculous. When he says that Scottie Barnes works half days, I think that's ridiculous. And I think that when we start, as you guys, with the blue check marks and the huge following, the national media and stuff, when you start questioning a guy's games, that's cool. I like it. I appreciate it. Hold him accountable. Bad games are not a sign that a player did not work hard, does not love the game. But when I turn on a Clippers broadcast and they're echoing talking points from Doug Smith in some bullshit article where he says maybe Scottie Barnes didn't work hard enough this summer, he needs to work harder. And when they're saying this guy has had work ethic issues, that is where I say you have now crossed a line which has gone beyond basketball and has gone personal, because that is not an easy label to shake. And I know that you are a very smart person and you know that. So that is where I'm starting with. And that's what I want to say.
Yeah, so I'm going to preface this by saying anything I say from here is not about Josh or Doug or Grange, whoever. This is my take on it.
Sure.
I don't know who they talk to or what their reports are or whatever, or, the specific game you're talking about with Lewenberg. So this is just me. I get what you're saying. The work ethic stuff is, and there's a reason that I didn't write it or whatever. I wasn't, like, full disclosure, this summer, I got bumped from being a Raptors guy to being a Blue Jays guy for the summer. I wasn't out at Summer League this year for the first time since like 2015. So I wouldn't have been in a position to report about that anyway. I wasn't out there. I wasn't near the Rico runs and talking to guys around the Rico runs and stuff like that, like I have been in years past.
Okay.
So I wouldn't have reported that. Now, the clip that you took issue with today, and the reason that I responded to you was not that I didn't say those exact words, but the way it was presented was that I was being negative and questioning Scottie's work ethic. Now, I feel like the greater context of that conversation, it was very, very positive about Scottie Barnes and his recent play, you know, with the playmaking, whether you, and like we can get into the center, point guard, point center stuff like that. That's kind of semantics. But the reason I didn't appreciate the way it was framed and like finding out that this live stream's going on or whatever, I'm getting called out or whatever term it is like that was a very, very positive conversation about Scottie Barnes. And as a media member and as a teammate of Will Liu, like I am aware that Thorpe went on his show on a network that I'm on and went on JD Bunkis' show on a network that I'm on. So what I am trying to do in that moment is recognize that the audience has heard this from David Thorpe or whoever about Scottie Barnes. And if you know, this is kind of like debate 101 is if you ignore the counterpoints or the negatives, the people who feel that way or have glommed onto those things, their heads immediately go to, yeah, but what about his work ethic? What about this thing I heard say? So by acknowledging that and saying, you know, and maybe I didn't do the best job of it because I didn't know we were going there with the conversation. You know, you're just kind of talking freewheeling. But what I was attempting to do was, yes, Scottie has had some ups and downs, as you'd expect with any 21-year-old sophomore in a huge role. And, you know, where I was trying to go with that is like, he has been very, very good lately. Some of the strengths he had last year are still very much strengths. And even if you subscribe to this thing, by the way, I'm doing a bunch of hand motions and realize I don't have my webcam on. Even if you subscribe to this line of thinking or believe this report, he is showing you growth now regardless. And we're starting, like, even if you believed Thorpe or whoever else's reports, like, so from your perspective, that's a very negative take. But even if you believe that, he is showing you the type of steps and growth lately that you would want to see anyway. So maybe I didn't do the best job of contextualizing that. But to me, I can't have a conversation about Scottie's play and development on a show where that has been said without at least like acknowledging it and trying to add that context to the context of me saying, look, I think he's doing really great zooming into these dribble handoffs when he's given space. I think he's doing a really great job attacking Miles Turner's drop back. I think he's putting in the work to improve and understand how defenses are guarding him. You know, I think that whether or not you believe it, those criticisms of him are relative context as he continues to develop this year. I hope that makes sense. It was wordy.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me, and I appreciate you explaining that. And I understand that because a conversation happened with David Thorpe on your network, that you feel that it is perfectly within your rights to bring it up because it is unfortunately a very common talking point. And I just want to say that this is because of the setup. Now, I'm a film director, so I know a lot about setting up a first act. And the first act of this really was David Thorpe being Scottie Barnes, you know, grand savior. When everyone was confused, I'm sure I watched yours and Will Liu's entire pod about Jalen Suggs versus Scottie Barnes, etc. And just to put it out there, I've been Camp Scottie since 2018. So you might consider me a bit of a super fan at this point, right?
Hey, man, you look very right in that right now, right? So
I think it's just looking past the surface sometimes with Scottie, right? So the point here is that while I understand it, David Thorpe was often used as a voice of cautionary, you know, wait and see. There were a lot of brilliant stories that he shared about how Scottie had never envisioned himself as a scorer, how he, you know, that entire story that he shared about his son playing in FSU and the energy he brought. So it paints a narrative, unfortunately, for a lot of people who were caught off guard, maybe had not done a ton of research from what I was gathering on Scottie, maybe very prepared to print all the Suggs articles and kind of had to scrap them the next day. I remember Michael Grange basically like probably had that entire, you know, Suggs article pinned out, and then he was like kind of caught off guard.
Do you remember when I picked Scottie Barnes for, I don't know if you subscribed to The Athletic, but I picked Barnes at number 4 for the Raptors in an Athletic mock draft, and I thought I was gonna like get run off the internet for it.
Hey, look, like you're not the first person to respond to me. Sam Vecini responded to me a couple of weeks ago. He thought that I was being very unfair to him. But the problem is that anchoring bias is real, right? Yeah. So you know, we have a certain notion. And look, if Scottie Barnes was failing as a prospect, which I do not think that he is, I'm sure there would be a greater resistance for me to get off my Scottie's great post than for most people who didn't stand on the post to begin with. And so I guess what I'm saying is that when you, as someone who is as beloved and respected as you, even among, you know, people who don't really think very much of the media, I talk to a lot of smart people who understand basketball that think Blake Murphy is above it all, above that criticism that some of your, no offense, you know, friends, I'm sure, that you're above that. So you have a lot of weight, way more weight than I do, to create and shape the narrative about Scottie. And so, given the struggles that he's gone through this year, given the myriad of reasons that I could point to for that happening, including this offense, including coaching, including role definition, including the attempt for a player who has never been a go-to scorer to try and become that type of player. I mean, all the shots are different. The shot diet is different. Mm-hmm. So while I appreciate balanced, you know, analysis on it, especially from someone who studies the numbers like you do, where you can actually reference his, you know, percentages at the rim. I'm sure, you know, context B, you could also reference how great he's been as a catch and shoot shooter. I'm sure you know that, right? As a catch and shoot 3-point shooter, he's been much better. There are certain qualitative issues with his 3-point shot attempts, but he's evolved as a shooter. So when you even mention the David Thorpe thing, which I thought was really irresponsible on David Thorpe's part, no offense to him, when you mention that, and then you bring up the, you know, if we believe this and he hasn't put in the work to develop the 3-point shooting or the point guard stuff, and then it's in the grander context of, and this is why he's thriving at center because he hasn't ascended on that level as a playmaker and all that stuff. That to me is
clear. I don't think part of the center conversation was that he hasn't ascended as a playmaker, because even the times this year, if I've been a little down on the way Scottie's playing, like his assist rate and the way he involves teammates, and like last year it was like a lot of transition and improvisational stuff. Like he's improved a lot in that regard, and that's been like a pretty consistent talking point. Is like, for me anyway, is like, okay, maybe the scoring's not there, maybe the defense wasn't there that game or whatever, but the playmaking had taken a step. So maybe something got lost in communication there. Personally, I'm not a big fan of like traditional positional definitions anyway, especially with the way the Raptors like to initiate their offense. Like, I think it's great that Scottie's screening a little bit more, working a little bit more DHO, getting a little closer to the rim for those second chances. But like, honestly, I don't think the Raptors have like a traditional center role in their offense anyway. So I apologize if anything got lost in translation there. But yeah, I've been there. Like, of all the things of Scottie's season, the playmaking is where I've been most positive, I think.
Great. And I agree with that. And I think you addressed it in one of your tweets where you talked about the traditional positions being a bit archaic. So I appreciate that you're carrying that from at least a 2022-2023 evolved offensive approach to basketball. I just think that there's a lot going on with Scottie underneath the surface that does not warrant, it does not, because look, OG's having a bad shooting season. We can agree with that, right?
Everyone, pretty much everyone is, yeah.
Absolutely. And Fred is having the season from hell. He's having the worst season of his life since he's been a starter. He shot 37 to 38% pretty much consistently for 12 months. Here's what I have never heard. I have never heard OG Anunoby does not love basketball, does not care about basketball. I've never heard that OG Anunoby needs to work harder in the offseason. I've never heard any of these talking points. I have never heard that Fred VanVleet doesn't work hard on his game, because that would be absolutely horseshit for anyone who knows Fred VanVleet and how hard he works. That would be crazy. My issue is that attacking Scottie, attacking Christian Coloco as often as he has been attacked for being the quote-unquote worst center in the NBA, or worst starting center in the NBA, attacking the lack of bench production, ignores a very large elephant in the room, which is A, the offense, and B, the people driving that offense. And I think that when you start studying all the film tape, as I'm sure that you do look at tape, you know, you start to see that the problems being identified and talked about are not really indicative of the problems that exist within this team. And it's, I think, a little bit disingenuous to say yesterday that look at how much the bench, you know, outscored the bench. It's a fact. It did happen, but you're also talking like I have a heart, and I can tell from talking to you and just the fact that you called that you have a heart too, like a big heart. I can sort of just instinctively tell that, even though we've never talked before. So what I can just say is that I feel bad for someone like Precious Achua or Chris Boucher or Delano Banton, who's not even, with the team right now and playing in the G League, or Jeff Doughton, who didn't even get off the bench, which he should, or Malachi Flynn, who's, working through his own progression of trying to just latch on and get a second contract, that these guys become a scapegoat for a team that's struggling. I find that kind of ridiculous. And I don't remember this being the case under previous regimes. And by regimes, I don't mean Masai and Bobby, but I mean like leadership, DeMar, Kyle. I felt like those guys protected their younger teammates. I think they took onus on themselves. And last year, I made a little bit of a mix of Fred VanVleet sort of deflecting blame off of himself onto his younger teammates. And I think that's sort of become sort of the culture around here, that we're just going to attack Malachi Flynn for not being good enough to be a backup. We're going to attack the young bench, the youth, the inexperience. When Fred VanVleet comes out after a loss and says, we're just a really inexperienced team, you know who I know he's not talking about? Himself. That to me is low. It's low because it's not fair. Because when, and this is not me saying you directly, but please just go and look at the people who work in the Toronto media and find one of them who didn't talk about the bench scoring disparity and what the talking points would be at the water coolers today when people are like, oh my God, the Raptors need to trade for someone better on the bench. I feel bad for the players who play on this bench, because the reality is they're scapegoating 5 players who played a combined 41 minutes and took 7 shots, hitting 3 of them, and ignoring the elephant in the room, which is that you have an all-star, and I put it in air quotes, all-star point guard who shot 3 for 15 in 36 minutes. I don't think that's fair. I think calling an ace, and it's like when you go around and around and trying to do anything but, and I realize that Fred VanVleet has a lot of really favorable relationships with the Toronto sports media. And I've known NBA players in my life. I don't want to say I've never worked for The Athletic, but I have worked in sports media. I know it's very difficult to go after a player that's endearing, charming, and that you have a personal relationship with. Sure, go ahead.
If that's okay. Just because
absolutely,
I do have a relationship with Fred, but I also have the type of relationship with Fred where, like, look, full disclosure, I can't be in the locker room right now. Like, because of limited access and stuff. We only, like, Grange has the Sportsnet locker room credential. I'm up chilling somewhere else. So unless I run into him pregame, I'm not talking too much. But I do have a relationship with him, and a good one. And I think part of that relationship is built on calling shit the way I see it. And like my kind of guiding principle for analysis is never I want to be positive or negative. It's I want to be right. Like, that's more important to me. So, if Fred were on right now, I'd be like, Fred, you shot the ball really poorly last night, and your catch and shoot percentage on wide open threes has dropped almost 20 percentage points this year. Like, that's something Fred VanVleet knows, and it's not going to do me any good to tiptoe around that, because the numbers are the numbers, and like, we can all watch games. He's had a tough year, and the shooting percentages have dropped off dramatically. Now, in terms of the earlier part of what you were saying, I think and I don't expect anyone to go back and listen to the whole 50 minutes Will and I did today. But I
played 8 minutes of it for the audience, just why, because you said that I had taken you out of context. So I wanted to put you back into context. So I played out the entire thing.
I appreciate that. But yeah, before the Scottie discussion, like kind of off the top when we were talking about the game, I actually had a bit of a rant about how little they play the bench, and like, how do you expect to develop depth if you don't give these guys opportunities, and then when they come in, they have a quick leash and are looking over the shoulder and stuff. So I'm with you on the player development side of it. I don't really I don't think it's all that helpful, like game to game, to do the like, oh, whose fault is this or whatever. I had a Twitter thread today about some of the numbers about how often the Raptors get really late in the clock and how poorly they execute in those situations. And VanVleet is a part of that, right? Like, he's the point guard, he's running the offense, and the numbers aren't favorable for anyone in those contexts unless you're like Luka Doncic. But that's a team-wide issue. It's a poorly designed half-court offense, and that's going to have a trickle-down effect. So I know where you were going with that. I just want to step in because, like, yeah, I do have a relationship with Fred, but that relationship is also where I would have
but
no
see,
problem.
that's the thing, Blake, is like you have a relationship with Fred
I have a relationship with a lot of the guys.
Of course, and that's fair, and a lot of people who cover this team do, and perhaps more likely you would have that type of relationship because you're probably the type of person, from what I can gather just talking to you, that players would actually vibe with a little bit. I could see that. I get that, and I totally appreciate that.
It's just talk ball, and like, if you're going to be negative in your analysis or positive in your analysis, be ready
fair.
to back it up and talk about it.
Absolutely, be fair. And so my point is that what you just said about Fred, if Fred was here, I would say, you shot poorly on catch and shoot, and 3 for 15 and all that stuff. That's great. But what I never got from anything you just said was you're hogging the ball, slowing down the pace to suit your own style of play, demanding Scottie pass you the ball in transition when he has the ball because you want to be the point guard, taking shots out of rhythm, questionable shot selection. I don't recall a lot of Fred VanVleet has questionable shot selection, but
part of that is like, you can't put yourself in a guy's head, but also like I watched the tape back from last night's game, and like, yeah, at a certain point, you should probably stop shooting threes if you're not like, if it's not your night, look for something else. But
early in the clock, that 3-pointer. I mean, like, but
like
see, that's the thing. But it's
like shots you don't really have a choice. Like, if it gets you at 5-6 seconds left on the clock, you're not going to get a better shot than that. And like his usage rate has trended downward as the season's gone along. So, some of that's maybe in the injuries, and Scottie's just been playing so well lately with the ball in his hands.
But like, if I told you that a guy was like the worst shooter on your team, and I'm not saying he's the worst shooter, but he's shooting the worst on your team consistently for 12 months, and I told you that, would you be surprised if I told you that player was averaging 18 points per game? I think most people would
need the team context or whatever, but yeah, it's not the best, and that's why I think his usage rate has like trended downward.
It's still 22%.
He
still attempts more shots per 100 possessions than Scottie and OG. I think that's a problem because Scottie and OG shoot 8 and 9% better from the field than him. Now, I am not an idiot, and I am not, and I hope that you can gather that from talking that I may be a lot of things, but I'm not stupid.
Yeah, I never called you anything.
I know. And I'm just, yeah. So what I'm saying is I do understand the value of Fred VanVleet, and there have been people who have said, hey, Fred is not a good defender in the playoffs. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys don't understand basketball. He's a very good defender, but there are limits to this guy's game. There are certain elements that I wish the media could talk about, and it doesn't feel like they're willing to. And this just becomes an exacerbated problem because it doesn't seem Nick Nurse is willing to either, that Masai and Bobby aren't. And I've seen a lot of players called out by this organization, whether it be by Nick Nurse or whether it be, through the talking heads or whether it be through the media. I've seen Gary Trent Jr.'s defense be questioned openly. I've seen Scottie Barnes' heart and work ethic and off-season regimen. I don't know how to explain to you exactly how I know, but I promise you from the bottom of my heart, I would never lie about this. Cross my heart, hope to die. On my parents' grave, Scottie Barnes worked his ass off this offseason. Like, intensely crazy, worked crazy hard, and so did Precious Achiuwa. And they're both having worse seasons than anyone could have expected coming into this, albeit Precious has dialed it up incredibly on defense and is just shooting horribly on offense, like his true shooting percentage, shot quality, etc. Everything's down. I don't remember anyone saying, wow, Precious Achiuwa really should work harder in the offseason. It's just a tough tag to shake. I don't know if you were around when Vince got openly called out for dogging it. And it broke my heart to see somebody who worked so hard, to become the player that he was, to go from where he was in North Carolina to get to where he was. Basically, he led the entire league in value over replacement, a talking point that I've repeated not too many times. But to see a guy who'd done so much for the community, so much for his teammates, maybe just a little bit immature at that time, and he maybe didn't have the greatest relationship with the media as things were going south with his injuries, the way they assassinated him on his way out, that carried with him. No matter what he did, he became an Iron Man in the NBA. He became a consummate teammate. He's rarest
more
superstar.
NBA basketball than almost anyone all time.
Absolutely. And that guy got assassinated. And I tell you right now, when I bring up Vince Carter Hall of Fame to people, they still echo the same bullshit talking points that, no offense, some of the people you work around brought up 20 years ago.
I didn't say that shit. I wasn't around.
You weren't there. You weren't there. And I'm saying the people that this is, for me, it's personal because it's like I've watched this shit for 20 years. And it's not you. It's not you. It's not Will. You guys, like, Will is younger than me by 5 years. So Will was a kid when this was happening. He didn't even watch basketball when this was happening. But I have watched this happen for 25 years now. I have watched media make little insinuations. People run away with it. It becomes irresponsible to me. So my only request for you, to Will, to Josh, to anybody, is that if you are even going to mention, and I'm not saying you questioned his work ethic, I'm saying if you are even going to insinuate that that might have been an issue, that I just would like to know how you know. Because it's not enough to just say he's not shooting as well as we expected from three, and therefore he needs to work harder. Because I think that there are a million reasons why a particular player might shoot poorly from the three-point line for 20 plus games. And in fact, he started the season out 7 games in and shot 52% from three.
Yeah,
if you
and
recall.
like 3-point shooting isn't going to develop linear, right? Like
Absolutely.
Like Pascal has this reputation as a legendary worker. He had the worst 3-point shooting in NBA history one year. Like I get it. So to
Absolutely.
the whole point of this initial exchange, I understand where you're coming from.
Thank you.
I will be more appreciative of that, and I probably didn't set that Thorpe thing up the best in the context of that discussion. I hope through talking to me and interacting with me a little bit, though, next time there's something like that, like a little bit of benefit of the doubt, or hit me up and clarify what I was trying to get at, because I'm not an inflammatory type. I haven't reported that Scottie stuff. I think he's going to be a future also. Like I think the world of Scottie's potential and everything. So
well, then I am just really happy to hear that. And, you know, in all honesty, thank you for coming on. You are probably the only person who was brave enough to do this. And I don't mean brave enough like I'm some I'm some asshole who was just going to like set you up to fail in this interview or talk. But I just think it takes courage to come on in a situation where, you know, there isn't a lot to gain and a lot to lose. So
man,
I appreciate you coming on and doing that.
First of all, I just like talking ball, but I was also just sitting around watching Kings Jazz. So if it's a topic and it's about, like, rather than us tweeting back and forth throughout the day, may as well hop on and I don't know what's been 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And, you know,
and get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I just hope that you can use the extreme power that you have. And I don't mean to, like, you know, big you up, but I mean, you certainly have a great deal more power than I do to influence narratives. I mean, I call Scottie a point guard. I would love for the good things that he's doing. And I mean, apart from, you know, his Draymond Ben Simmons cloneness, because I brought up a point earlier, and I don't want to take more of your time, but I do want to bring up this sort of point, is like Will, and he had a Ringer guest on. I don't know if you watched that episode.
No. Who was it?
I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he is a writer for the Ringer, and they talked about the Scottie and Kevin Durant trade from the offseason.
Okay.
And they brought it up, and he said, "Hey, like, you know, would you still do it?" Something to that effect. And the Will said, "Well, I don't know if the Nets would do it because there's so much overlap between Ben Simmons and Scottie Barnes." And I was irritated because that has connotations. It does. Ben Simmons. I asked our chat earlier, when I say Ben Simmons, name me the 2 words that you think of, and they're prima donna, non-scorer. Seems to be a bit of a narrative forming around Scottie Barnes, right? You connect people subconsciously process information all the time that they don't even realize. So the Ringer guest said, if you give me Scottie Barnes, I will waive Ben Simmons and drive him to the airport. I lost my shit laughing at that, because that is exactly how that conversation should go. And that is exactly how rival GMs, scouts, players who know actually view Scottie. This narrative that he's not a point guard, that he's an ascending point guard, developing point guard. If you watch his EYBL games, as I'm sure you've at least sniffed them and watched some of them, he's been a point guard for like forever. It doesn't always look like a point guard. It's not as shifty as Cade. I get it, but it doesn't matter because Kawhi doesn't score like Jordan. You know, I mean, in a lot of ways, you know what I mean? So my point is that I think that there's this narrative in Canada that American media hates us, that, you know, they're always covering the Raptors unfairly. And I thought it was just hilarious in that moment that you have a generally affable, likable, you know, somewhat good guy, media guy like Will Lou, making this comp from Ben Simmons and Scottie Barnes, and to have an American media journalist basically squash that and say, if that's the concern, I will literally waive Ben Simmons, who's a hell of a player. So I just think that if you have an opportunity at some point, and I'm sure you'll have some good things to say about Scottie, over the next few months as he, gets out of this injury stuff and all the limping and stuff. But I would love to hear this addressed, not this specific, what I'm saying addressed, but just to see how far he's come in the last 18 months. The player he was at Florida State, to go from that to what he is today, it is a journey unfathomable. And I have a lot of respect for Pascal and Fred and OG, but they've never made a jump like this in 18 months at any point. What he was doing at Florida State, what he's doing now, it's night and day difference. The places he's getting shots off are different. It doesn't always convert to the box score. I get that. It doesn't always look pretty. I also get that. But his playmaking load, his ball handling, his shot form, there's so many improvements. The task that this guy is given on defense every night is extreme. To have a rookie go out and play that hard on a nightly basis, and to have his work ethic questioned by members of this media, not you, members of the media, it breaks my heart, to be honest. That's all I wanted to say, and I apologize, and I want to thank you for having this honest discussion with me.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. And like, I understand this is the concerns. And yes, Ben, I was watching Kelly Olynyk dime people up. Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on and us just kind of hammering this out, because this to me is like, this is a more fun basketball conversation. It's a less anxious thing than going back and forth on Twitter. And I would hope you got a couple hundred people watching here listening. I think I would hope they get more out of this than us going back and forth on Twitter or whatever.
It's unfortunate that this is like 3 hours and 52 minutes into the stream, and I was never expecting to go past 2 hours, but the conversations just kept going and going and going, and then you called. So yeah, I appreciate you calling in. Hopefully we will meet. Yeah, likewise, and hopefully we'll meet someday in less contentious, is that the word? Maybe less adversarial environments. Cool. But yeah, no, it's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on, man. Have a good night.
All right, man. Have a good one, guys.
Cheers.